And he is going, and he's going to follow in, continue talking about evacuation, modeling and planning, but in the context of megaregions.
LSU had a rough weekend last week. You saw that. It's a heartbreaker. Coincidentally enough, I worked with my first research project was with Johns Hopkins Applied Physics Lab, and we developed the evacuation model for, I think it was a chemical disaster and a bioterrorism threat. So we did the first simulation models for event planning in that area. I thought that was a pretty nice coincidence. All right, I'm Scott Parr. The presentation I'm giving today was done by a good friend of mine, Zhao Zhang, from Southwest China University. Couldn't be here for obvious reasons. I'm with Louisiana State University. Dr. Brian Walshaw, wish he could have been here, but couldn't make it. And we were doing modeling analysis, evacuations, and megaregions. Try to be quick because I think we're behind on time. We're okay? Good. All right. So what is a megaregion? Well, megaregions are cities that have over time grown together. So a great example is New York. Started off as an individual city that has grown over time and merged with Boston and Philly and parts of Jersey, all the way down to DC. So that over time that these regions have grown and grown and grown, and they share the same history, the same culture, the same environment, topography, and coincidentally enough the same problems. So some examples of megaregions, the Gulf Coast is what we're going to be talking about today. Our model extends from New Orleans out to Houston, but you can make arguments to extend it through Gulfport into Mobile, Alabama, and down to Galveston. Southern California is also a megaregion, a bunch of small cities that over time population has grown and grown and grown, and now they're mega regions. Right? The inspiration for this research, so we said, what if there was a storm, a hurricane coming that either was so intense that it caused multiple, this caused almost affected the megaregion in a way that evacuation orders were given for the multiple cities within the megaregion, and how these traffic problems are merging into one and causing a really big disaster as far as evacuation goes. Or what if there was a storm which had a highly variable track that traversed the megaregion in a way that every individual municipality was saying, oh my God, we have to evacuate, what are we going to do? So that was, so the goal of this research is to say, all right, we're going to develop a megaregion model on a microscopic level, so a microscopic traffic simulation model of a megaregion, and we're going to evaluate areas of congestion, effects of traffic problems, travel times management, and decision making. How are we going to address, how are the decision makers going to address the evacuation issues of the hurricane? So, do I have a clicker up here anywhere?
Top right.
Top right. And I assume it's that one. Okay. So this is the area of our microscopic simulation model. It's a transims model. So initially it starts here in New Orleans. The way the model came into being was it initially started with a small area of New Orleans, an evacuation model of New Orleans, right in here. Typical microscopic simulation size, maybe a couple square miles. And then from Hurricane Katrina, we said, all right, well, why don't we expand it to incorporate the whole city of New Orleans? So we expanded it out, and we ran some contraflow models and got some results and said, all right, well, what if we took it out to Baton Rouge here? Could we handle that? And we said, yeah, all right, we'll spend some money on some hardware and get some good computers in here. We'll expand this microscopic simulation model out to Baton Rouge. They're like, it's great. We have a great model that is more or less one of a kind in the fact that it can expand out to include another city. Meanwhile, Rice University was doing a Houston model using transims, also from the same funding as we received from SWETC, the Southwest Regional something. But So we said, all right, well, what if we took, we gave our IT guy a budget and said, make us a computer that can run all this stuff. We want to run from New Orleans to Houston. So they crammed a bunch of RAM in a box and made it run. And then my good friend Zhao Zhang came in and developed the model all the way that connected the two. So he developed the Baton Rouge model and connected it out Lake Charles, Lafayette, Beaumont, and into Houston. So we were eventually we were able to get the whole model set going and evacuating microscopic simulation, which is really impressive if you're familiar with microscopic simulation. So as far as making the model work and run, so the evacuation man, there's a professor at LSU, his name is Chester Wilmot. And over the last couple of years, his bread and butter has been doing traffic demand for evacuations. So after Hurricane Katrina, he started developing traffic surveys for evacuation responses. So trip generation, trip distribution, route choice. He did this using empirical data that he used survey data that he obtained for people who actually participated in the evacuations. When did you evacuate? Why did you evacuate? At what point would you evacuate in the future? And he developed a sequential logic model that says it predicts the probability of evacuation for each individual household based on the current situation, where the storm is, storm intensity, your family household unit, your family demographics. And we applied that to the entire, we took the New Orleans model, which he developed, and applied it to the entire region. Also developed was destination choice. So when you decided to evacuate, where did you evacuate to and why? We expanded this out to the whole region. So now we have the actual geometric design, and we have the people on the road. We say, all right, well, how do we know that our model is going to work at all? I mean, we know that we can run the model, but how do we know that it represents anything that makes any sense? So we took traffic data that was collected during Hurricane Katrina in 2005 and calibrated the New Orleans model. And we took traffic data that was collected from Hurricane, wasn't Gustav, it was Rita in Houston. We took that traffic data and calibrated the Houston model and validated with the travel times reported in the surveys collected from the regions. And we found out that our model works reasonably well. You know, it works within statistical range. So then we said, all right, well, what are we going to test? Well, we make 6 scenarios. First three scenarios are Hurricane Gustav. So the first scenario is actually Hurricane Gustav, a Category 3 hurricane, I believe. Scenario 2 was a Category 4 hurricane, and Category 3 was a Hurricane Gustav and Category 5. When I say Hurricane Gustav, I mean the track, where it made landfall, the time of day, things like that. And essentially what we're doing is we're varying the evacuation response. So Hurricane Gustav at Category 3, you know, obviously coastal regions are likely to, if you have a mobile home in a coastal region, you're highly likely to evacuate, you know, with a hurricane with a Category 3. But if you're, say, New Orleans or maybe North Shore, just north of the Lake Pontchartrain, you're probably not going to evacuate with a Category 3 hitting, you know, the Gustav track. So we said, all right, well, we're going to increase the category and then put it into our sequential logic model to find out when and if people will evacuate. So, and then we go to Category 4, which was an actual storm that hit in 1865. It's unnamed. We're going to show you here in a second the actual track, and you'll see why we use it. Category 5 is a 1914 storm, which is a Category 4, and Scenario 6 is a Category 5. It is the same as Scenario 5, but a Category 5 event. So here we have the Hurricane Gustav track. So that's scenarios 1, 2, and 3. And it pretty much comes up right through the heart of our megaregion. And depending on, you know, Category 3, Category 4, Category 5, you're going to get evacuations, you know, permeating from the center of this track. And eventually, if you get a Category 5 hitting here, a big storm, you're likely to get evacuations in Houston as well. So then we said Scenario 4, which was the 1864, 1867 hurricane actually came up through here and went across. So if we were doing it, if this hurricane were to hit today, you would get evacuation orders for, okay, everyone, all right, it's gonna hit down here. Oh wait, all right. Well, now we have the cone of death. The cone of death says, well, it's gonna hit Galveston. And then, so everyone in Galveston goes, oh no, we gotta evacuate. So they evacuate up to Houston. And then people in Houston, then the cone of death says, oh no, the storm shifts. And now the cone of death says, we're gonna nail Houston. Or we're gonna nail Baton Rouge. Or we're gonna nail New Orleans. Or we're gonna nail Mobile or anywhere else that we're gonna hit. So you can see how the evacuations are running into one another. That people who evacuate Galveston are now running into Houston, and people that are evacuating Houston are going to New Orleans, and people now it's coming to New Orleans. So you have a big problem, and decision makers have to deal with. All right, well, our evacuees in say Beaumont here are going into the taxpayers of Louisiana. All right, so how are we going to deal with this, and who's in control of the evacuation flow? I mean, once they get out of our state, are we going to say, okay, well, you're out of the state and you're fine? Well, that's part of what this mega region model is trying to do. It says we have traffic problems that originate in one area, cross boundaries, and how are we going to make decisions based on that? Well, we're telling you, the model tells you what time it is. All right, well, you have traffic here, and you have traffic here, and they're going here, here, and here, and this is what time it is, and you decision makers are going to have to deal with this at some point. So this gives you the participation rates for each scenario. You see here scenario 4 generates the highest participation rates across the board for each city. So scenario 4 is the worst because you have evacuees from everywhere going anywhere. So this is a big slide. So this slide is just here pretty much. So if we put this online or something, you can actually see the results. The important thing here is travel times generally range between 2 hours and 4 hours until we get to day 1 of scenario 4, which completely crashed the computer. So this thing ran for over a week, and we couldn't get it to converge on a result. It just crashed. It was too much for it. So scenario 4.
That was the 1865.
Yeah, that was the 1865 that went through everything.
Because you didn't have force modeling.
Yeah, right. Well, we said if that 1865 had hit us now, but yes, we had horse modeling. If we had the population of 1867, we'd be okay too. But we ended up generating, I think it was over 4 million vehicles for the simulation trying to track. We didn't actually generate it because it crashed. Trying to track over 4 million individual vehicles driving within this giant model we developed. So I have some error versions here, but essentially, hurricane scenario 1, we found that the contraflow helped the best. I mean, you increase the capacity, and it works out much better. Scenario 2, same deal. Contraflow helped alleviate the situation. However, that contraflow is only relevant when the demand is necessary. So towards the end of the simulation, the contraflow doesn't really have an impact because the demand has been alleviated, or the major choke points have been alleviated to the point where it's not necessary. Scenario 3 was Gustav Category 5. Contraflow wasn't that helpful because we've reached the absolute capacity of the road network. You only have so much asphalt, and you can only get out so many people. So once you get to a certain level, contraflow is a very expensive thing in terms of manpower and resources because you have to close down highways, you have to close down intersections. You're always constantly trying to avoid that head-on collision. Furthermore, if you mismanage your contraflow, if say you have two contraflow lanes, you have them spread out, you have them break off one lane, and then you have them come back together, say in Mississippi, well, all you've done is moved that choke point. So if you mismanage your contraflow, now you've only moved the choke point further down the road, but you haven't really done anything. You have to take those contraflow points and you have to take them to different cities. So, if you want to go, say, I-10 west, going west, you would take that to Houston, but I-10 west going east, or I-10 east going west would go to Baton Rouge. So you have to take them out and you have to put them in different places, or else you're just moving things. You're only moving choke points. So in that sense, that contraflow is very expensive. Well, when you get to the certain demand levels that we're seeing in our model is suggesting that, well, it's not really going to help all that much because there's nowhere to go. Results 4, over 4 million vehicle. Scenario 4, over 4 million vehicles were generated. Crashed the model. Yeah, it was just too much for our computer. If we had like a supercomputer, or maybe not, because this was done maybe a year ago, so maybe some new processors or something would help. Category 5, this is pretty much more of the same, that the capacity of the network, we've reached capacity, and it didn't help all that much. We see that scenario 6 is similar to scenario 5, except more demand. So the conclusions of the research, we demonstrated the ability to do a mega-regional model in a microscopic level, which I think is pretty impressive. The fact that we could monitor and track these vehicles over these distances at a microscopic level, I find to be impressive. So the fact that we were able to calibrate and validate to a certain extent this giant model was also very good. The demand model is developed by Chester Wilmot and probably 3, 4, or 5 of his master's and PhD students over the last 7 or 8 years. Shows that it shows that they too are also validated by some of the research. And let's see. So from this model, we are able to say, all right, well, these are the problems. So if you had this storm, we can model any storm you want to now. Now we can take any storm and say, all right, well, we have a storm track that says it's going through New Orleans, and it could turn left, and the cone of death includes Houston. Well, we could plot that out and give you results now within a day or two. So if we are 7 days out from a storm, and we say, all right, well, we want to see what's going to happen in this scenario. Well, a day or two later, we can give you the results, and then you can say, okay, well, now the storm looks like this, and these results kind of sound like that. All right, we're better able to provide information to decision makers so they can make decisions. All we can do is give them the information. They make the decisions. But as long as we can provide information that is reasonable and likely, then they can make a better decision so that they can save lives or decrease delay or whatever it is they want to do. That's it. Thank you. Question? Yes, sir.
So in your scenario 3, where you were saying that the capacity was reached, what was the breadth of the road coverage that the model had? So does that really mean that every single road that was leading out of the Megaregion was just to capacity, or is it just on certain routes that you were
certain routes, certain evacuation routes? So we're looking, maybe not all the arterials, but certainly the freeways. The freeways was at capacity, and we're talking using contraflow and everything else. But you can see that from the average travel time of being in the range of 2 to 4 hours, it's only for so long, because you have all that capacity, so it's only for so long that you're delayed like that. Yes, sir.
In Hurricane Katrina, Houston folks, around 8, 9 o'clock, the management center, they knew there is a need to do counterflow, but it wasn't implemented till either 3 a.m. or 5 a.m. because it had to be governed by executive order. Through this process, do you know whether anything has changed for issuing counterflow traffic?
Well, since 2005, before Hurricane Katrina, this evacuation was kind of like in the background. So you couldn't really, it wasn't in the forefront, I would say. Since 2005, I know that in New Orleans, because I'm more closely related to the New Orleans guys, that they have a traffic management, an emergency management meeting, and they bring in police officers and firefighters and paramedics and city managers and everyone every month. That's about 6 weeks, every month and a half. Every month they get together and they say, okay, based on, we have construction on I-10. Well, all right, we have construction on I-10, so now our I-10 capacity is affected, so we're going to have to manage this in the event that something happens in the next 6 weeks. And they have constant updates like that. I'm not sure if Houston has.
I think I can answer that one
Maybe.
since I'm from Houston. Houston does have a very good hurricane evacuation plan now in place after what happened with Rita, because everybody tried to evacuate at the same time. All the freeways were clogged up, people were not able to go anywhere, they ran out of gas, and it was a big mess. So ever since politicians as well as the DOT, the local agencies have taken a very active role in it. And Houston now has a very good evacuation plan. And I tend to disagree with Michael here because he was saying they are this big. In Houston, they are not this big. The MPO manages the evacuation plan, and it's about maybe this thick.
So are they authorized, the traffic management people, are they authorized to issue counterflow?
Yes, they are, but the mayor makes the final decision. The county judge or actually the Harris County judge tends to be the one who makes the final decision, but he is always present at the Houston TransStar, which is our TMC for the entire region. So as soon as a hurricane comes towards Houston, there's a big roll call meeting that takes place with all the state DOT people and the other DOT people, and they make the
In my
decision.
experience and with my experience with the New Orleans guys, that contraflow is a last resort, because it is, you have the potential for head-on collisions and the fact that it's so personnel demanding. It puts a large strain on the police officers and the people who actually have to close down the roadways. So as far as in New Orleans, it's a last resort, but it's always a resort that, you know, we will try to do phased evacuations and anything else, but if the demand warrants it, it's there.
Does the model have the dynamic capability to take into account cascading events?
Okay, on a traffic accident, yes.
Well, or a bridge.
Bridge collapse or a
We have
flooding?
a lot of bridges in that region.
Yes, in the sense that we can go in and we can program a lane closure or a temporary lane reduction. We can do that. We can program anything like that. We'll just, instead of saying, you know, the bridge is collapsed, we'll just say, okay, it's a lane closure at this time, and then traffic will reroute around. Yes, sir.
Is there kind of a decision support system based on multiple scenarios analysis, like forecasted scenarios analysis, where you are studying multiple paths of the hurricane, as you said, or as explained, like different kind of other events happening? So is there like do you run multiple scenarios and come up with the best plan that this is how this is the plan which will take care of most of the events or scenarios?
We can run as many scenarios as well, and a lot of the scenarios have similar attributes or similar outputs. But as far as decision makers go, we're just telling you what time it is. You know, that this is the hurricane path. All right, well, if we model this hurricane path, the time is, well, there's congestion on I-10. Well, the congestion is going to last for approximately this long during these hours of the day, and you know, during the AM peak or the PM peak, because we find that hurricane evacuations, you know, people say, oh, I'm going to evacuate. Well, I'm going to evacuate first thing in the morning. I'm not going to go in the middle of the night. So that there is an AM peak of evacuation demand that say, all right, we're going to leave first thing in the morning. We're pack up the kids, pack up everything tonight, and we're going in the morning. Well, a lot of people do that. So, but as far as the decision support, we can say, hey, this is when your peak demand is. These are the congestion levels. You might want to do contraflow on this highway and this highway from this time to this time, because we can estimate that that's when you're going to have the highest demand. But as far as decision support, well, we'll give you the information, but you know, you guys make the decisions.
What's the temporal resolution of the analysis? Is it every hour, every half hour, 15 minutes?
We can do that in 15 minutes, we can do that in 5 minutes. We are tracking each individual vehicle. So if you wanted to pick any random vehicle, we could tell you the location and the time of that vehicle.
So you assign a time of departure for each and every vehicle that's
yes.
possibly Or,
Well, it's randomly generated from distribution, so we plotted the distribution of the departures in a sequential logic, and each individual household or each individual car makes a decision that the probability of this car leaving at this time is a function of the storm intensity, the storm location, my family demographics, and the cumulative probability that I decided not to evacuate in all previous time steps.
and this is the last question. Do you have an allowance for the first responders to be able to have to go into the area, provide a path for them that is viable?
That is as far as the contraflow planning. So we can, in the model, we can open up as many or as few lanes as we want for contraflow. So if we're dealing with a 6-lane road, what we can model all 6 lanes going eastbound or westbound, or we can do 5 lanes and 1 lane. I mean, we can model anything. As far as that particular scenario, I don't believe it was included in here, but it could just as easily be added. Instead of 6 lanes going out, it's 5 lanes or 4 lanes or however you'd like to do it.
Last question.
So you're talking about the household demographics of the auto trips being made. I mean, outside looking at Katrina, one of the issues was people with limited mobility options being able to get out. And how does this model affect people who would use mass evacuation vehicles like buses or other things to get out of these areas?
This particular model does not include a mass transit evacuation. However, when I was showing you, when I was highlighting the smaller models, so the model that is New Orleans to Baton Rouge, that model has the transit routes and the transit evacuation plan modeled into it. It was actually done by a PhD student named Hannah, I don't remember her last name, but that's what her dissertation is on, is in the event of Hurricane Katrina, we're always fighting yesterday's battles. As far as the planning and decision making, we're always fighting. Well, Hurricane Katrina happened. Yeah. Well, how would we address that in the future? Well, it's going to be different in the future. So we're always fighting yesterday's battles. But we did the model of Hurricane Katrina with the transit response that should have been in place, that was planned to be in place, but was never enacted. So we have that model, but only for now.
Thank you, Scott.